Chapter 56 Heartbeat. Fan Xian walked in the direction of the side hall with his head lowered, but the remaining light from the corner of his eye landed on the heavenly altar in the main hall, and in his heart, he was curious as to who was praying there and was actually able to drive that middle-aged expert. He knew that the other party's background must be unfathomable, and that he only wanted to come to the celebration temple to have a look, so there was no need to fight for this idle breath, even though his name was Fan Xian. His right hand was still over his lips, and he coughed twice every now and then, but after using his true qi to circumnavigate his body and abdomen earlier, he confirmed that his muscles hadn't suffered any substantial damage, and that it was just that when the forceful qi was reversed, it had cracked the fragile membrane between the larynx, rather than his lungs or the upper bronchial tubes that had suffered any damage. He walked along the way all the way coughing, looking at the white handkerchief above the bloodstains, remembered Lin Daiyu, remembered Su Mengxiu, remembered Zhou Yu, remembered Lin Qinan, many cough altar seniors, cough cough, Lin Qinan, or forget it, not in front of the three cough of the poignant. Walk to the side of the hall, the true qi has been a little bit of small injury repair 7 or 8, Fan Xian some regret to put away the handkerchief, look back at the temple of heaven, and to the side of the hall. The side hall was a slightly smaller temple, surrounded by a green stone wall, and there was no one inside. Fan Xian realized that he didn't see the legendary ascetic monk and felt slightly disappointed. He casually walked into the temple and was even more disappointed to find that the temple actually didn't have the statues of the gods that were common in his previous life. But on second thought, it is also normal, since the offer is the sky. What this sky is like, naturally no one knows. In the center of the temple, there is a side of the incense case. Incense case is extremely wide, above the yellowish satin hanging down, all the way down to the ground, covering the lower lapis lazuli plate. Above the incense case rests a fine porcelain incense burner. The furnace inserted 3 incense. The incense column has burned most of the room is covered in that kind of quiet and pleasant fragrance. Fan Xian casually strolling in the temple, his eyes from the colorful paintings on the walls swept through, he found that the painting style of these murals is very similar to the later generations of oil paintings, but the picture of those who are standing on the top of the mountain, or sinking in the sea, or sitting in the volcano of the gods do not have a real face, slightly fuzzy and distorted. It seems to be the painters intentionally so arranged. After taking a look, he realized that these murals were only about ancient myths that had been mentioned in the scriptures, and there were also such contents as the Yu's ruling of the water and some other things, but Fan Xian couldn't match them with the scriptures after looking at them. He shook his head, giving up the idea of finding some answers from here, and found a futon from the side of the hall, threw it in front of the incense burner, and ran down, palms together, closed his eyes to the green smoke rising from the incense burner, his lips moving slightly, praying without stopping. In his previous life, Fan Xian was naturally an atheist. In this life, Fan Xian was a firm theist. This transformation happened very naturally, and any person who encountered such a strange encounter with him would probably have the same mental changes as him. So he knelt down very devoutly and prayed, hoping that the ethereal heavens, the trackless temples, would explain why he came to this world, and at the same time praying even more devoutly that the heavens would give him a lot of silver and a very peaceful life. As if the tangible and qualitative green smoke suddenly glowed and dispersed a bit, Fan Xian's ear tips slightly trembled, as if he had heard something. He opened his eyes with some disbelief, looking at the small porcelain stove on the incense case that was slightly shaking, incomparably shocked. Could it be that this seemingly pious, but in fact absent-minded prayer of his own had actually really let the heavens detect it? With his eyes resting on the wide incense case, Fan Xian finally realized where the problem was, and with a brilliant light flashing through his eyes, he pressed his left hand onto the boot where the dagger was concealed, and slowly but firmly stretched out his right hand to pull open the amman cloth draped underneath the incense case. After pulling open the amman cloth, what fell into Fan Xian's eyes was an image that surprised him. A girl wearing a white right-over-right dress was half-squatting in a corner under the incense case, looking at Fan Xian in surprise. The girl's eyes were large and soft, like the surface of a tranquil lake that was so quiet that it wanted to put people to sleep permanently. Her features were even more delicate and beautiful, with light pink skin and long eyelashes. It looked as if a person from a painting had walked out. Fan Xian was stunned. His eyes lingered on the other's face, gradually realizing that the girl's forehead was a bit large, her nose a bit pointed, her complexion a bit too white, and her lips seemed to be a bit thicker than the average beautiful woman. And there were still a lot of imperfections, but when combined together, with a slightly timid expression and a naturally occurring shyness, it still made Fan Xian's heart flutter. His heart was moved. The girl curiously looked at this young man who was devoutly worshipping the sky, and realized that the other's face was so beautiful, so clear and uncluttered that it didn't look like a mortal's, and even his eyelashes were so long that he couldn't help but stare for a few more moments. After looking at, the girl realized that something is wrong. A light red color quickly painted on both sides of her cheeks, and then quickly spread. Even the roots of the ears are red. But she still cannot move away from the gaze, the heart curious, this outside who is the young man, surprisingly born so good-looking. Qing Temple, the corner of the temple quiet, Fan Xian's hand is still pulling that piece of almond veil, his eyes are still lingering on the girl's face, and the girl also gathered enough courage to look at him, so each other looked at each other, do not know how long, still a silence. Fan Xian's gaze gently brushed across the girl's face, and the girl finally lowered her head slowly in shame. Fan Xian's gaze finally landed on the girl's lips, and only then did he realize that the other party's lips were unusually shiny. He curiously looked twice more before realizing the reason that had haunted him for a long time afterward. The girl was holding an oily chicken drumstick in her hand, and the oil on her lips was obviously stained from chewing on the drumstick. Such a beautiful and elegant woman in white actually hid under the incense case of the solemn celebration temple to steal a chicken leg. This strong contrast made Fan Xian open his mouth wide, half unable to speak. After a long time, there was finally a sound inside, and outside the quiet, awkward silence, subtle incense case. "Who are you?" "You are." This pair of beautiful men and women opened their mouths at the same time, and even their slightly trembling voices were extremely similar. Fan Xian heard the girl's voice for the first time, only to feel soft and all unattached. That feeling is very comfortable, but also let a person is very unattached. Chest agitation actually really spit out a mouth of blood. Ah! When the girl saw him spit out blood, she was startled, but not because she was afraid. Her eyes naturally showed a very strong color of pity, as if all the pain Fan Xian had suffered was in her heart. Fan Xian looked at her worrying about himself. His heart was warm, and he smiled and comforted. "It's fine. If you vomit and vomit, you'll vomit into a habit."